Sometimes, I wonder if everything would have been different if my dad hadn't died that spring morning. I was only 6, but I remember it like it was yesterday. Dad wasn't making pancakes. He was conducting our Sunday science experiment, his specialty. He always turned our kitchen into a miniature laboratory, explaining complex physics principles with childlike wonder in his eyes. Ellie, my little scientist, come help your old man measure these compounds. Dad called out, waving a glass stirring rod like a conductor's baton. His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm behind his wire-rimmed glasses, his MIT sweatshirt speckled with years of scientific exploration. I jumped off the couch, abandoning my favorite stuffed bunny, a gift from Dad when I'd first shown interest in the stars, and raced to the kitchen, my 6-year-old heart pounding with excitement. That's when it happened. The stirring rod shattered against the floor, and Dad clutched his chest, his face contorting in agony. I stood frozen, watching the brilliant mind that had taught me to question everything struggle for breath. Everything after that dissolved into a cacophony of ambulance sirens, sterile hospital corridors, and Mom's desperate sobs echoing against institutional walls. Look at the stars whenever you miss me, Ellie. I'll always be there with you, were the last words he whispered to me as I gripped his hand in the hospital room. I still didn't fully understand that this brilliant man, Associate Professor Daniel Wright, who was becoming known for his work in particle physics, would not be returning to our Sunday experiments. Just like that, my dad was gone, leaving behind an empty house filled with unfinished research papers and scientific journals that felt too big and too quiet without his animated explanations filling every corner. Mom didn't remain in her grief-stricken state for long, though. She met Marcus at a grief counseling group that was connected to the university's science department community outreach program. He was different from Dad, but impressive in his own way, tall, with thoughtful eyes and a measured smile that conveyed stability rather than Dad's wild enthusiasm. Marcus was a structural engineer with his own design firm, whose methodical approach to problems reminded me a little of how Dad would break down complex equations. I watched as Mom gradually came back to life during their year-long courtship, her educator's passion slowly reigniting it as she discussed teaching philosophies with Marcus. Within a year of meeting, they were married, and he moved his collection of architectural models and engineering textbooks into our house. I was still adjusting to having a new father figure, examining his structural designs with cautious curiosity while he patiently explained load-bearing principles, when Mom delivered another life-changing announcement. She was pregnant. I remember her face absolutely glowing with renewed purpose as she shared the news, one hand resting protectively over her stomach as she told me I was going to be a big sister. "This is a new beginning for all of us," she said, her eyes filling with tears of joy. I smiled back, trying to ignore the whispers of worry that rippled through me. I was 10 when Caleb was born, and that's when everything in our carefully balanced family structure began to shift. That's when Mom quit her position as kindergarten principal, a job she'd worked toward for years and had only held for 18 months. "Caleb needs me," she'd explain whenever anyone questioned her decision, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "These early years are crucial for developing his exceptional abilities. The right stimulus at this stage could make all the difference for his future." I wanted to ask about my early years, about whether they hadn't been equally crucial to my development, but the words withered in my throat. Instead, I observed as Mom's world gradually contracted until it revolved entirely around Caleb and his supposed special talents. Our bookshelves slowly filled with titles like Nurturing Your Gifted Child and Exceptional Parenting for Exceptional Children, while my sans fair ribbons disappeared from the refrigerator door. Mom forget to sign my permission slips or pack my lunch for school, then act surprised when I mentioned being hungry at dinner. "Oh, I'm sorry, sweetie," she'd say distractedly, already turning back to Caleb as he smashed food around his plate. "I was so busy with Caleb's developmental assessment today. The specialist thinks his finger dexterity indicates advanced cognitive patterns." It wasn't just once or twice. It transformed into our new normal with mathematical certainty. Marcus noticed. I'd catch him watching Mom with a concerned frown as she fussed over Caleb's every movement, completely ignoring my questions about high school science requirements at the dinner table. One evening, as I sat alone solving complex algebra equations, he sat down beside me. "You know, Ellie," he said quite softly, helping me rearrange a particularly challenging formula. "Sometimes people get so caught up searching for extraordinary potential that they overlook the remarkable abilities already flourishing right in front of them. His eyes lingered meaningfully on my nearly perfect math homework, and for a moment, I felt seen. As Caleb grew older, the tension in our house became impossible to ignore, like a poorly designed structure showing signs of stress fractures. Marcus tried talking to mom countless times about her obsession with Caleb's special talents, but their discussions always ended with the same predictable outcome: mom becoming defensive and increasingly entrenched in her beliefs. I remember one particularly uncomfortable evening when Marcus broached the subject during dinner. Caleb was about 5, listlessly pushing organic, specially prepared food around his plate while mom hovered over him, trying to convince him to try just one more bite of the brain boosting salmon. Vivian, Marcus said, placing his fork deliberately beside his plate, his engineer's precision evident even in this small gesture. We need to discuss this approach. You can't keep hovering over him like this. He needs to learn to do things independently. That's how real skills develop, through trial and error. Mom's face immediately hardened, and her expression changed to one I was familiar with. What exactly are you saying? That I'm somehow damaging his potential? That I'm a bad mother for recognizing his exceptional gifts? That's not what I meant, and you know it. Marcus replied, maintaining his calm, analytical tone. But we have 2 children in this household, not one. And I've noticed that Ellie's recent science competition achievement hasn't even been acknowledged. He glanced toward me with encouraging eyes. Caleb needs me, Mom snapped, her voice rising defensively. He's still so young, and his talent requires nurturing. The developmental window for his type of giftedness is closing rapidly. I was young too, I muttered under my breath, thinking of my solitary science experiments in the garage. But my words dissolved into the tension-filled air, unheard by anyone but me. The situation culminated when Marcus suggested enrolling Caleb in Little League Baseball. I was sitting on the stairs, supposedly reviewing my chemistry notes, when their voices carried clearly from the kitchen. Absolutely not. Mom's voice was shrill, reverberating through the house. For heaven's sake, Vivian. Marcus's normally measured voice rose with frustration. He needs to experience real-world interactions. You can't protect him from every possibility of failure. That's how resilience develops. Every structural design I've ever created needed testing under stress. But Mom remained immovable, her stance as rigid as concrete. Instead, she enrolled Caleb in private art classes at the community center to nurture his creative genius, she explained. I still remember Caleb's sullen expression as he sat there, mindlessly dragging his expensive brushes across specialty paper while other children enthusiastically explored colors and shapes. Meanwhile, Marcus began dedicating more time to my academic interests. Perhaps it was his way of counterbalancing Mom's behavior, or maybe he genuinely recognized the scientific aptitude I'd inherited from my biological dad. Every weekend became our special time for building engineering projects together, testing material strengths, designing small structures, and discussing the principles of physics that connected his work with my dad's research. Your mind works in remarkable ways, Ellie, he said as we constructed a miniature earthquake-resistant building together. You have both the creativity to envision new possibilities and the analytical skills to make them reality. That's a rare combination. He took me to his design studio on Saturday mornings, introducing me to his colleagues and showing me how theoretical principles translated into real-world applications. Persistence matters more than natural talent, he often reminded me as we worked through challenging problems. Your father understood that too. But while I flourished under Marcus's mentorship, developing a passion for biomedical engineering that combined Dad's scientific legacy with practical application, Caleb was becoming increasingly difficult. He'd leave his room in complete disarray, expensive developmental toys scattered everywhere, many still in their packages, and Mom would turn to me with that expectant look I'd grown to dread. Ellie, clean up Caleb's learning environment, she'd say in a tone that masqueraded as a request but carried the weight of a demand. He can't focus with all that stimulation around him. One day, Marcus witnessed this familiar scene unfold. Ellie's not his personal assistant, Vivian, he protested, his architectural plans tucked under his arm. He needs to learn organization and responsibility. These are fundamental life skills regardless of his supposed gifts. That's when Mom's eyes welled with tears. I knew it. You've always favored her intellectual interests over his artistic sensibilities. How can you possibly understand what a truly gifted child needs? I watched Marcus's expression fall, saw the structural integrity of his resolve weaken under this emotional assault. He glanced at me apologetically, then raised his hands in surrender, a building yielding to inevitable forces. Fine, have it your way, he said quietly. After that confrontation, he stopped arguing with Mom about Caleb's special treatment, but the look he gave me conveyed everything words couldn't. He hadn't abandoned me, even if he'd given up challenging Mom's parenting philosophy. It was a small reinforcement in my increasingly unstable world. My high school graduation day arrived with mixed emotions. As I stood on stage accepting honors in mathematics and science, scanning the audience through my valedictorian cords, I spotted Marcus beaming with undisguised pride. Mom attended too, but she continuously checked her phone, undoubtedly monitoring the special enrichment program Caleb was attending instead of watching his sister graduate. Later that evening, Marcus invited me into his home office. "I've been planning for this moment," he said, pulling out a folder containing MIT brochures and financial documents. "Your father's alma mater. I think he'd be proud. You've earned this through your own merit, Ellie. The partial scholarship you won through the state science competition will cover a significant portion, and I've set aside funds for the remainder. You can pursue bioengineering and follow your dreams. The sky's the limit for a mind like yours." My heart was overwhelmed with pride, gratitude, and feelings of being able to carry on my dad's legacy. Before I could fully express my thanks, Mom burst in without knocking. "You can't be serious about this amateur nonsense," she exclaimed, her voice sharp with disbelief. "That money should be saved for Caleb's future specialized education. His unique talents will require exclusive programs. He'll need it far more than Ellie needs an engineering degree she'll probably never use. Women rarely advance in those fields anyway." Marcus's face hardened into the expression I'd grown familiar with during these confrontations, his jaw setting with the same determination he showed when defending his structural design against uninformed criticism. "This is non-negotiable, Vivian. I've already made my decision. Ellie has earned this opportunity through years of dedicated work, and I won't allow her achievements to be dismissed." He placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "Some talents need to be recognized and nurtured properly. Daniel would have wanted this for her. I chose MIT without hesitation, far enough from home to breathe freely and forge my own path, yet still connected to my dad's scientific legacy." The day Marcus helped me move into my dormitory, his car packed with carefully labeled boxes of textbooks, laboratory equipment, and research journals, Mom claimed she couldn't join us because Caleb was experiencing separation anxiety about her potential absence. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. "He's already downloaded 3 different tracking apps on her phone," Marcus confided as, "She has to check in every hour." MIT embraced me like the intellectual home I'd always craved. For the first time in my life, I experienced the exhilarating freedom of being valued for my mind rather than compared to someone else's imaginary potential. Every time I watched doctors using medical devices to save lives, I remembered my dad's final moments and recommitted myself to developing technologies that might prevent such losses in the future. I called home weekly out of obligation, but my meaningful conversations were exclusively with Marcus. Mom was invariably monitoring Caleb's creative breakthrough or researching specialized educational approaches. "Your brother's going through a difficult period," Marcus explained during one of our video calls. "He's left the community college courses after just 1 semester. Now he spends most of his time with his online gaming group, Regal Command, and stays up all night. I tried to offer him an internship with my company, but your mom—" "Let me guess," I interrupted, recognizing the familiar pattern. "She said you were being insensitive to his unique learning style?" "Exactly." Marcus's sigh carried the weight of years of similar conversations. "Called me an educational tyrant. She insists I can't possibly understand his creative sensitivity or advanced spatial reasoning training. Meanwhile, his doctor suggests he may be mildly depressed, but Vivian won't even consider treatment options." My visits home became increasingly rare as Caleb's behavior deteriorated further. The few times I did return, he barely acknowledged my presence, secluded in his room amid expensive gaming equipment and untouched creativity development tools, his expression alternating between boredom and resentment. After graduating with honors and multiple research publications to my name, I secured a position at Meridian Medical Technologies in their R&D division, developing cardiac monitoring systems. I remained in the Boston area, building my professional reputation while watching from a distance as my brother retreated further into his virtual world, supported by Mom's increasingly elaborate justifications. During a rare holiday visit home, I knocked gently on Caleb's door. Caleb, want to grab coffee? My treat. I'd love to hear what you've been working on, I offered. The only response was the simulated gunfire from his latest game and the rapid clicking of his controller. Mom, passing by with an armful of organic snacks specifically purchased for Caleb, merely shrugged with a resigned smile. He's not feeling social today. He's very emotionally drained from his creative processes, you know. These gaming tournaments require intense focus and strategic thinking. The contrast between our parallel lives couldn't have been more pronounced. While I was developing technologies to monitor cardiac irregularities, inspired by the losses that had shaped my childhood, Caleb was accumulating virtual achievements and digital trophies, bolstered by mom's endless stream of excuses and rationalizations. By 29, through careful financial planning and disciplined saving, I had accumulated enough for a down payment on my own condominium in a pleasant Boston suburb. It wasn't extravagant, just a one-bedroom with good natural light for my small herb garden and a second bedroom converted to a home office and laboratory, but it represented hard-earned independence. The day I received the keys, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over me. You all should come see my place, I suggested during a weekend video call home, genuinely hoping to share this milestone. I'm hosting a small housewarming gathering next Saturday. I'll prepare dinner, Marcus. I'm even making the lasagna with the perfect layers you taught me. Wouldn't miss it for anything, kiddo. Marcus replied with genuine warmth, his eyes crinkling behind his reading glasses. Mom's voice interjected from somewhere off screen. Oh, honey, I don't think we'll be able to attend. Caleb has important commitments that day. I couldn't disguise the skepticism in my voice, having heard variations of this excuse for years. What sort of commitments? Very significant networking opportunities. Mom responded vaguely. The evening of my housewarming celebration, only Marcus arrived, carrying a potted plant, a miniature maple that would thrive with proper care and a bottle of aged wine. Your mom sends her regards, he said as he entered, though we both recognized the polite fiction in his words. Over dinner, Marcus provided an unvarnished update on the situation at home. Marcus had repeatedly attempted to help, offering him an entry-level position at his architectural firm. Just as a starting point to build some workplace skills, you understand, Marcus explained, taking a bite of the lasagna. Everyone needs to begin somewhere and develop fundamentals. But Vivian. He shook his head, his expression reflecting years of similar conversations. Vivian insisted it would be beneath his creative capabilities. Can you believe that? Claimed that Caleb's exceptional mind shouldn't be wasted on drafting tasks when he's destined for visionary innovation. Apparently too exceptional for actual productivity, but not too exceptional for marathon gaming sessions and living off parental support, I observed, unable to completely mask the frustration in my voice. Marcus offered a resigned smile that contained equal measures of affection and regret. That was our last meaningful conversation about family dynamics. 14 months later, I received the call that fractured my world for the second time. Marcus had collapsed at his design studio while completing a major project deadline, another heart attack, echoing my dad's death with terrible symmetry. By the time I navigated Boston traffic and reached the hospital, medical intervention had proven futile. His funeral was a surreal experience in cognitive dissonance. Mom orchestrated an elaborate performance of grief, sobbing dramatically while simultaneously documenting her tragic widow journey for her social media followers, telling anyone within earshot what an extraordinary husband Marcus had been. We had such a beautiful partnership, she wailed. How will we possibly manage without his strength and vision? I observed her production with a complicated mixture of disgust, pity, and scientific detachment. Her tears seemed calibrated not for Marcus, but for her audience, both physical and virtual. Without his architectural firm's income, how would she maintain Caleb in the lifestyle of perpetual potential to which he'd become accustomed? Caleb didn't even make the minimal effort of wearing appropriate attire to the funeral. He appeared in wrinkled khakis and a gaming tournament t-shirt that had clearly been plucked from his floor. Throughout the service honoring the man who had tried countless times to guide him, he remained fixated on his phone, alternating between gaming apps and social media, while Mom made excuses to the concerned mourners from Marcus's colleagues. He processes emotional trauma differently, she explained in hushed tones. Standing beside Marcus's grave, surrounded by colleagues from the engineering and architectural communities, I couldn't escape the terrible symmetry of my life, another father figure, another cardiac event, another funeral. I was 31, and with my training in biomedical engineering and cardiac monitoring systems, I understood what happened physiologically, including the painful recognition that mom's emotional manipulation had contributed to the stress that strained Marcus's heart. A year following Marcus's death, I had intentionally distanced myself from Mom and Caleb, focusing instead on my research team's development of an early cardiac warning system inspired by both my dad's deaths. What limited information I received came through occasional calls from Aunt Linda, Marcus's sister. They're depleting Marcus's retirement accounts at an alarming rate, she informed me during one such conversation. Vivian sold his vintage drafting table collection last month. His professional library of architectural journals went before that, to some salvage dealer who probably didn't recognize their value. I attempted to remain emotionally detached, channeling my scientific training toward objective analysis rather than emotional engagement. Nevertheless, when Mom's number illuminated my phone screen one Tuesday evening as I reviewed clinical trial data, my parasympathetic nervous system betrayed me with an involuntary cardiac acceleration. Ellie, her voice sounded diminished compared to my memory, lacking its usual confident manipulation. I need you to come home. Please. It's important. Something in her vocal frequency, a genuine distress signal I hadn't detected before, compelled me to book a flight for the following morning, despite my rational mind's objections. Upon arriving at what had once been our family home, I barely recognized the property. The meticulously designed landscape that Marcus had planned with such care, each plant selected for both aesthetic value and structural contribution to the soil integrity, had degenerated into an overgrown tangle. The architectural details he had added during thoughtful renovations were deteriorating. Paint peeled from window frames he had personally selected for optimal energy efficiency, and decorative shutters he had designed hung at precarious angles. Mom opened the door, and I had to suppress a gasp as my analytical mind automatically calculated the physiological changes in her appearance. Deep creases lined her face, and her hair, which she had previously maintained with meticulous precision, displayed pronounced gray roots beneath haphazard home coloring attempts. Come in, she said, leading me into the living room that Marcus had redesigned to optimize natural light. The house carried the unmistakable odor of neglect, and unwashed dishes formed a precarious tower in the sink. A visible layer of dust covered every surface. Mom, what's happening here? I asked, settling onto the couch where a broken spring pressed uncomfortably against my thigh. Another structural failure Marcus would have immediately addressed with professional precision. She crumpled almost instantly. We're facing financial crisis, Ellie. My pension barely covers basic utilities, and Marcus's savings. Her hands twisted together in her lap, fingers compulsively interlacing and separating. They're nearly depleted. What about Caleb? Is he contributing to household expenses? I inquired. Mom's expression performed a complex oscillation between embarrassment and defensive justification. He's actively looking for the right job. This situation is not his fault. The job market doesn't accommodate creative minds like his. His last employer offered him to come in at 8 a.m., but you know Caleb's circadian rhythms are usually out of sync with society. And his last position required a lot of physical work. That would be a waste of his intellectual capacity. There is no way he could realistically choose between jobs at age 24, having completed neither education nor work experience. You fundamentally misunderstand his situation, she interrupted. Then, with calculated precision, her tone modulated completely. Ellie, we require your assistance. We cannot sustain ourselves without intervention. I just like asking, but with your successful research position and those patents you've developed, I recognize the approaching request with absolute clarity. Part of my logical brain urged refusal, but observing her deteriorated physiological state, the tremor in her hands, the desperate cortisol-induced dilation of her pupils, my compassion overrode my rational analysis. What financial assistance do you require? When she specified $2,000 monthly, I experienced momentary respiratory arrest. This represented a significant percentage of my research salary, funds I had been allocating toward developing my cardiac monitoring prototype. But I found myself nodding in agreement nevertheless. Where is Caleb currently? I inquired as I prepared to depart, already experiencing cognitive dissonance regarding my decision. Oh, he's attending an important interview. Mom's expression brightened perceptibly. A very promising opportunity with an innovative tech development company. Through the window, I could clearly observe Caleb's bedroom illuminated and the unmistakable blue flicker of his multiple monitors. True to my commitment, I established an automatic monthly transfer of $2,000 to Mom's account. Each time I saw that significant sum deduct from my bank, I rationalized it as a moral obligation, even though it meant postponing my cardiac monitoring device development and delaying the clinical trials that help prevent deaths like Dad's and Marcus's. How's the job search progressing? I'd inquire, attempting to initiate constructive dialogue. Mind your own scientific business. He'd snap with surprising aggression, or sometimes merely grunt and increase his headphone volume to drown out real world interaction. During winter holidays, I couldn't tolerate seeing Marcus's thoughtfully designed living space deteriorating so severely. I redirected my research bonus toward hiring specialized contractors to restore the structural integrity he had valued so highly. When Mom suffered an ankle sprain in February, I called to assess her condition with medical concern. It's manageable, she insisted, though my trained ear detected the pain modulations in her voice frequencies. Is Caleb providing any assistance during your reduced mobility? I asked, already anticipating the response. He's completely occupied with several promising virtual interviews, she explained defensively. I arranged for a qualified home health aide that same day. The funds I'd been meticulously saving for a much-needed research retreat were immediately reallocated to cover the healthcare professional's salary for the following 3 weeks. Then came the afternoon. I entered the house to discover an unfamiliar young woman sprawled across our sofa. Her appearance suggested significant time investment. Acrylic nails extended to impractical lengths, cosmetics applied with theatrical density, an attire that seemed calibrated for maximum social media impact rather than functional purpose. She was intently focused on her smartphone, surrounded by empty nutrition-devoid food packaging and discarded beverage containers. May I ask who you are? I inquired. Caleb emerged from his room, emerging briefly from his digital isolation. This is Jasmine, he announced with uncharacteristic confidence. My fiancée. She lives here now. Jasmine didn't acknowledge my presence, continuing to scroll through her Instagram feed while audibly masticating gum. I observed with scientific detachment as she casually reached into the grocery bag containing specialized nutrient-dense foods I had specifically selected for Mom's post-injury recovery and extracted the premium imported protein cookies. Nice meet you, I murmured with subtle irony. Later that evening, I contacted Mom to gauge her perspective on this significant household development. Oh, Ellie, she sounded more animated than she had in months. Caleb is finally establishing a meaningful relationship. Jasmine has been such a positive catalyst for him. He hasn't associated with those negative peer influences in weeks. That's because she's consuming all my imported nutritional supplements at home, I thought clinically. But I maintained strategic silence. And he's discussing serious career possibilities. Mom continued with palpable excitement. Jasmine's family connection knows someone at an emerging technology venture. Caleb believes this could be his breakthrough opportunity. Mom appeared so emotionally invested in this latest iteration of perpetual hope that I chose not to introduce objective reality into the conversation. My subsequent visit commenced in the typical fashion. I balanced multiple shopping bags containing fresh produce and nutrient-dense foods as I navigated through the front entrance, only to halt abruptly at the threshold. The interior environment had degenerated into extreme disorder, unwashed dishes accumulated in precarious formations, food containers distributed across multiple surfaces, and personal attire randomly dispersed throughout the communal living space. She demonstrated no acknowledgement of my arrival as I deposited the groceries on the only clear counter space. You know, I stated with uncharacteristic directness, you reside here without financial contribution, consuming nutrients purchased with my research salary. The minimum reciprocal contribution might include basic household maintenance. She elevated her gaze with deliberate slowness, a calculated expression of superiority manifesting across her excessively glossed lips. Who exactly do you believe you are to issue directives in this environment? This residence isn't your property. I'm assured in this household, I counted with factual precision. Your status here is fundamentally transient. That's when she emitted a laugh. Oh, sweetie, your information is fundamentally flawed. This property legally belongs to Caleb now. Your mom has transferred all ownership documentation to him. The legal paperwork has been properly executed. I located mom in the kitchen, organizing discount coupons she never utilized. Are you sure? My voice sounded distorted in my auditory perception. She initially avoided eye contact, manipulating the papers before her with nervous energy. Then her expression transformed, displaying a hardening of emotional boundaries I recognized from years of similar confrontations. Yes, she confirmed without inflection. I cannot process this logic, I articulated. I'm providing consistent financial support. I'm transferring substantial funds monthly. Caleb remains unemployed and contributes nothing to household maintenance or expenses. Don't you dare apply your cold analytical framework to your brother. Mom's voice elevated sharply. You fundamentally misunderstand his creative process. You never have comprehended his special requirements. What specifically requires understanding? That he systematically exploits without contribution. That he appears perfectly content to consume my financial resources while his partner disrespects our family home. Stop applying your scientific reductionism to everything. Mom's facial expression contorted into an unfamiliar configuration. You deserve to know the unfiltered truth. I never experienced the emotional connection with you that I feel with Caleb. His natural talents exceed your methodical intelligence in every meaningful dimension. Your presence is no longer welcome in this household. Throughout years of systematic exclusion, I had maintained the hypothesis that mom genuinely valued me, just expressed it through different behavioral patterns. That beneath her obsession with Caleb's imaginary potential, some authentic maternal connection existed. This empirical evidence conclusively disproved my theory. I departed without further communication, Jasmine's triumphant vocalization following me down the corridor. The return journey to Boston existed outside my conscious awareness. My typically precise memory contains no record of the 4-hour drive, the process of entering my condominium, or positioning myself on my sofa. However, I recall the moment of perfect cognitive clarity that emerged as I examined my financial management application, the automated monthly transfer of $2,000 to mom's account for the preceding year. The funds could have accelerated my cardiac monitoring systems development timeline. My index finger suspended momentarily above the display before I decisively selected Cancel Recurring Payment. During subsequent weeks, I immersed myself in laboratory research, channeling my emotional energy into the cardiac monitoring system that might prevent tragedies like those that had shaped my life. The financial resources previously directed towards supporting Caleb's stagnation now represented opportunity rather than sacrifice. I began exploring research grant applications to supplement my prototype development funding. Precisely 30 days following my final visit, Mom initiated contact. The financial transfer failed to process, she stated without preliminary social exchange or inquiry regarding my well-being. There must be a technical malfunction with the banking system. No technical error exists, I replied, noting with scientific curiosity the unusual steadiness in my vocal patterns. I intentionally terminated the recurring transfers. A measurable silence preceded her explosive response. You deliberately what? How dare you demonstrate such ingratitude? After everything I've sacrificed for your development, I experienced an unexpected autonomic response, genuine laughter. What specific contributions are you referencing? Consistently overlooking my academic achievements, assigning me as Caleb's unpaid support staff, explicitly stating you never experienced authentic maternal connection with me? That statement was made under emotional duress. She employed her characteristic defensive tone reserved for Caleb-related topics. You understand I was experiencing heightened stress, but you cannot simply terminate financial support. We've incorporated those funds into our planning processes. Caleb and Jasmine are organizing a trip to Cancun. They require a vacation? I interjected, my voice elevating involuntarily. Caleb requires respite from what precisely? Virtual gaming achievement pursuit? Craft beer consumption? Let me offer this evidence-based conclusion. Caleb doesn't need a holiday. He needs productive employment. How dare you characterize your brother through such a reductionist lens? You're clearly experiencing jealousy because what specific factor? Because you transferred property rights to him despite my financial contributions? That represents your decision. Now he can assume caretaking responsibility for your needs. You calculating and heartless. The remainder of her verbal assault devolved into incoherent emotional accusations. I allowed the outburst to continue briefly before responding. Goodbye, Mom. Please refrain from further contact attempts. I implemented immediate communication blocking protocols before she could continue. Mom's determination proved persistent. Throughout subsequent weeks, she posted messages on multiple social networks. On Facebook, detailing her financial difficulties. On Instagram, publicly characterizing me as a neglectful daughter. Caleb participated in the communication campaign, transmitting aggressive messages about my supposed responsibility for family disintegration. Mom experiences emotional distress because of your actions, he wrote with uncharacteristic sentence structure. You must resume financial support immediately or face consequences. I implemented blocking protocols for his contact information as well, but not before responding. Here's an evidence based suggestion. Consider seeking gainful employment. Even Jasmine attempted communication, sending a LinkedIn message containing an elaborate narrative about my betrayal of maternal trust and explaining how Caleb was too psychologically sensitive to endure conventional employment environments. I had to acknowledge her adaptive creativity, if nothing else. 6 months have now elapsed. I possess no current data regarding their circumstances. Perhaps they've recognized the necessity for Caleb to develop self-sufficiency. The factual reality is that I no longer require this information. What I know with scientific certainty is that the $2,000 previously directed toward enabling dysfunction has been systematically invested in my cardiac monitoring system prototype, which recently received preliminary approval for clinical trials. I experience improved sleep quality, no longer disrupted by manipulative communications or guilt-inducing interactions. I know with absolute certainty that Marcus would express pride in my establishment of appropriate boundaries, as would my father Daniel, whose scientific legacy I continue. Recently, while driving past a biomedical research facility, I noticed a seeking engineering talent advertisement. Momentarily, I considered capturing an image to forward to Caleb as a final data point. Instead, I simply continued driving toward my laboratory, experiencing the physiological markers of genuine contentment. Their systematic dysfunction no longer requires my participation. Finally, after years of experimental validation, I've established the optimal conditions for both scientific and personal growth.